Yes, that's right, which is one of the responsibilities of the Leader of the House.
And in the course, not, I suppose, of your duties as Leader of the House, but just as a working Conservative politician over the years, have you met David Frost?
Oh, yes, I have. I think he's an absolutely brilliant individual, enormously capable and effective man.
Tell us all about him, the new National Security Advisor.
Well, he's been a civil servant. He's done extraordinarily well in the negotiations with the European Union, both to get us a deal at the end of last year and set out very clearly in a speech earlier this year the approach that the government's taking to the next stage in our relationship with the European Union. And he's also worked closely with the Prime Minister historically.
And is he, excuse me for the confusion, carrying on as chief Brexit negotiator, as it were?
As I understand it, yes. He is the chief Brexit negotiator and will be the National Security Advisor. He is, if you like, the Henry Kissinger of our days, that as Henry Kissinger was the National Security Advisor and a very important influence in the development of foreign policy of the United States, so David Frost is a very important influence in the development of British foreign policy.
That leads to a very interesting American-style question, which is he a National Security Advisor now as a civil servant, or is this a political appointment?
He has been appointed, as I understand it, in much the same way as the Prime Minister has the right to appoint ambassadors, that ambassadors don't need to go through a formal applications process and can carry out that role as a political appointment whilst being still within the system of the British government rather than being, to some extent, outside it. So it's on that basis that, as I understand it, the appointment has been made, and with that authority.
Do you happen to know if any other appointment of a National Security Advisor in the UK has been made on that basis, Jacob?
Well, the National Security Advisor is a relatively modern post, but I don't think there's been one over many decades and centuries. But I think it has been the case that Prime Ministers have had advisors who have been close to them, have been people that they have trusted over centuries. So I don't think it's atypical in that sense.
I'm not making a comment on the desirability one way or the other, but it doesn't sound to me as though he was appointed on the same basis as, say, Mark Sedwill. Now, I haven't had the pleasure of doing the podcast with you since June the 2nd. When we were broadcasting at that stage, the decision had not yet been made to allow MPs to have proxy votes. And that was on June the 2nd. On June the 3rd, it was announced that this would happen. Can you explain the reasoning for the change?
Yes, that we wanted to get people back physically to ensure that government business could be pursued, that the legislative agenda could be followed through with from the election manifesto. And that requires people to be here. But some people have medical conditions where they are being advised by the government not to go into work, and therefore provisions were made for them in the same way as maternity and paternity leave are provided for.
And Jacob, this was reported as a climb down by the government and an emendation by the Prime Minister to a decision you'd made. The way the Daily Express, God bless it, reported the decision was they said that the Prime Minister had been, quote, forced to apologise to MPs for Rees-Mogg's decision.
Well, I don't think there was any need for an apology, nor was any apology given. But inevitably, when you are looking at procedures in response to a crisis, things evolve. And say we moved from a system where the House could only sit physically. We came back and passed a motion that meant that we could have a virtual parliament, which lasted during the height of the pandemic and allowed for a certain amount of scrutiny, but not very effectively for legislation. we then moved back, and as we moved back, things were adjusted according to circumstances. I don't think there was any climb down, merely an evolution.
Okay, let me ask you a question that's based as much on that incident, no more or less, than, say, the debates that the Commons is going to have this week over the immigration bill. A view has been put around that these days a majority of 80 isn't what it was, and that in the 1960s or the 1970s, even the 80s, a majority of 80 would have been one thing, but a majority of 80 now is quite another. In short, MPs have simply, for one reason or another, become more rebellious, and the majority is less firm and decisive than it looks. What's your view of that?
I think there's a very interesting theory about the independence of MPs and how this has waxed and waned over the last 200 years. And I think you find that the lowest period of rebellion is in the 1950s, when people vote according to the whip, almost invariably. But that is, of course, a period of very considerable political consensus that the Buttskillism, for want of a better term, was a popular way of marrying. There was a considerable degree of consensus, and therefore there wasn't necessarily a great deal to rebel about. But if you look at the 1980s, you have a great deal more rebellion, and that Margaret Thatcher faced the issues with the so-called wets, and they had political following within the House of Commons, that the Prime Minister certainly didn't win all her, the then Prime Minister didn't win all her votes in the House of Lords, and in the House of Commons there were a number of significant rebellions. So I think it's something that waxes and wanes, but that 80 is a very substantial majority and means the government can get its key business through. If you want to take the example of proxy voting, that as an evolution, all wise governments listen to what people are saying and allow policy to evolve, rather than saying, I initially thought X and I'm never going to change my mind. That isn't the same that the government isn't able to deliver on its key policy objectives, which I believe this government is able to do, and the majority of 80 is more than enough to deliver for.
Is it waxing or waning, or is the flow of the tide, as it were, all in one direction? I mean, I ask because it seems to me there's been a change in what MPs are, and perhaps not so much in what they are as in how they think of themselves over the last 25 years, in that increasingly they have come to see themselves, and why not, as constituency champions. And increasingly they've been funded, on the whole, by the taxpayer rather than by private interest, by business or the trade unions or whatever. If you have MPs as constituency champions, they will become and be more rebellious, won't they?
Well, that's a slightly different question, I think, because what you're saying there is, are we becoming more American, with members of the House of Commons essentially being like members of the House of Representatives and always looking to the narrow advantage of their constituency, very often in terms of public expenditure, rather than the broad national interest. Now, my view is that this is partly true, that yes, MPs spend much more time in their constituencies, are much more constituency champions than they were going back historically, when they might not be in their constituency more than once a year. But that very rarely leads to rebellion. That rebellion is mainly on major philosophical, ideological issues, such as the European Union, rather than on whether a bridge is built in my constituency or your constituency. Why is that? Well, getting the numbers to rebel on where a bridge is built is almost impossible, because that just affects you as an individual MP rather than affecting a swathe of ideological soulmates. So I think the European issue has been fundamental as to why there's been the appearance of more rebellions. And small majorities make an individual MP demand things for his or her constituency in a way that is completely different when there is a majority of 80. If you look at the 2017 to 19 Parliament, one MP could make or break the government's agenda for the week. That's clearly not the case now. And so MPs adjust to the realities of the power balance.
We will make America great again.